guest today. This is Gwen. She is flirting with history over on TikTok, and so you should follow her absolutely if you're on TikTok. So Gwen is a historian focusing mainly on ancient Egypt and the Near East. She has been history obsessed since she was a little girl, and what she is sure everyone thought was just a funny phase for an 8-year-old, she has turned into her biggest passion since beginning her university studies in 2020. Her love for history has deepened significantly, and she has branched out into the field of archaeology. Though her work is mainly academic, she has a small presence on social media via Instagram and Substack, where she shares her articles on various ancient topics. So welcome on in, Gwen. I'm very glad that you are here today. And we love it because normally our guests, we have amazing, great guests, but normally our guests are not Egyptology focused. So this is perfect because we can chat till the cows come home, when sometimes I have guests that were I can chat with you about some things, but it's almost we're teaching each other, when this is just we know stuff that is similar. And so this is going to be so exciting. Anything you want to say before we get started?
Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm very happy to be talking about it with you, sharing knowledge with someone who actually knows something about Egypt as well.
We love it. We absolutely love it. All the audio sound good to everyone. And hello, Kepper. Welcome on in, because we will get started if all the audio sounds good, so I don't have to adjust anything later. Let's get ready to share. We will be doing discussions, so reminders, we do have the channel points for over on Twitch. Thank you, America's Problem, for the roses. Thank you so much. Over on Twitch, we have the lecture questions. So if you have a question to either me or Gwen, please use that channel point. It's only 1 onk. It does not cost you any of your precious channel points. But please do that just so in the case that we're going off on a tangent, because it's probably going to happen, because Gwen has already admitted she goes off on tangents, and you guys know me. That's all we do on this channel. That's all we do on this channel, is we somehow go on tangents that cause our streams to be 6 hours by accident. So please use the lecture question so that I can see it. It can be saved. We can come back to it. If it's something that if it's about something that we're going to talk about later, we will save it and stuff. So please use that channel points. And then people on TikTok as well, because we got 2 different chats going. Please provide your questions, and then I will share those with Gwen, because Gwen cannot see the TikTok chat. But let's get started. Okay, now everyone can see that. And Gwen can also see that. And what is that? Sorry, I'm looking. Hello, Spook. How are you? Thank you for the subscription. Yes, we're walking like an Egyptian. We're talking like Egyptians today. That's the goal. Sorry, I gotta adjust one thing over on the TikTok live. And that's that. Alrighty, you ready to get started, Gwen?
I am.
And be nice to her. I'm looking at you guys in the chat. Be nice. I will, or I gotta get a mod in here to boop you temporarily. So, alright, whenever you are ready.
Thank you. So I really wanted to focus on Egyptian women, specifically in relation to power and influence. You'll see that I picked 5 women who are quite prominent in Egyptian history, either for holding a significant amount of power alongside their husbands or male relatives, or those who ruled by themselves to some degree. I think it's really important to acknowledge that Egyptian women had so much freedom and equality compared to women in the West, such as Greece and Rome. And the West seems to have a very big reputation of being the most dominating sort of empire or civilization in the ancient world, which I think, yes, there are periods in which Greece and Rome did dominate, women are often left out of that history, and that's one half of an ancient population that we're not talking about. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I really wanted to focus and hone in on that, and sort of do a compare and contrast to women in Egypt and women in the West.
Absolutely. Let's go. Female power. Absolutely. All right. Next slide.
Yes,
Here
please.
we go.
Okay, so these slides are like you can toggle between the two, I guess.
Okay.
These are the women that we'll be talking about. Some of the names will be probably very familiar, I'm guessing, to a lot of people. People like Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, Queen T, Cleopatra, they're all very um, prominent women in history. People like Cleopatra and Hatshepsut who have had, I guess, their reputations and legacy have been very overtaken by male voices and narratives, and that's something I'll get into. But yeah, these are the women we'll be chatting about. Do you have anything that you would like to?
I I love talking about women in ancient Egypt, and one of the things I like talking about is the I've dropped this word a couple different times in streams, but the historiography, so the study of these women over time and watching how different historians from like going all the way back to Herodotus, Boo, and Manetho, and all those people, but then also like the early armchair archaeologists, and then coming closer towards female historians and female archaeologists who have been investigating them and studying them, because we don't really talk about it the same way that when we're investigating pharaohs. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I would say like there are definitely some pharaohs in ancient Egypt that get this like big like scrutiny. Akhenaten is one big one that comes to mind, um, but that's literally just because he's different like than the rest of them. Like the way that people study Akhenaten is not the way that people study Ramses the Great, who's my least favorite
Mm-hmm.
pharaoh of all time. Um, but I think it is so interesting to see the differences because obviously we're talking about thousands of thousands of years of time, and unfortunately it is just so there's so many gaps in the knowledge,
Yeah,
and
there's a
so
huge gap.
huge, and so a lot of it is unfortunately we need to fill it, and there are gaps obviously everywhere, but certain pharaohs don't. There are definitely like gaps like in the intermediate periods and stuff like that, but like I would say that in some cases some of those pharaohs like in the intermediate periods have the same amount of gaps that these women do, when many of them are not in those intermediate periods where records are scarce. They are in these huge big time periods like the New Kingdom and the Ptolemaic era. I think Cleopatra is one of the more interesting ones because she is in an era which, like, I am not a Ptolemaic Roman Egyptologist. That is not my specialty, and I've been very honest about it that a good amount up until a couple years ago that I knew about Cleopatra only came from the Elizabeth Taylor movie, and then me double checking Wikipedia as I'm watching the movie. Um, but I think it is so odd that she is so scrutinized and there are so unknowns, even though she is in a time period where, in comparison, records are way better.
Oh yeah, and I think for me, because I love Cleopatra. She's absolutely one of my favorites. I love her because it seems like no matter how much hate and scrutiny she faced from Rome and Augustus,
Mm-hmm.
she was a powerhouse. She was like,
Yeah.
screw you, I'll keep going. And particularly when I talk about her, one of the things I really like to highlight is that so much of the opinions and the negativity that we have or people have about her actually stems from ancient Roman propaganda.
Oh yeah.
When Augustus came out and was like, she's a slut, she's a tart, she did this, she did that, she wants Rome.
Mm-hmm.
that's where it all stems from. And I think that that's a thing that we have to really separate ourselves from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have a book that I will admit I have not read, but one of my very good friends did her master's on Cleopatra, and I think might be compiling a book now. But there's a book. I'm trying to figure out. It's literally on this shelf right behind me, with all my other Cleopatra things. This one, Cleopatra: Hopes, Dreams, and Distortions. And this is a book that I recommend to a lot of people because it's a chunky one, but it does go through like the fantasy and fact and her portrayals in movies. We have Elizabeth Taylor on the back, and it's got a lot of, it's essentially, I believe, a historiography of Cleopatra over time and going over certain events. So there's like a whole section about her suicide, there's a whole section about her as the lover, as the child, as the killer. Like it kind of goes through all of these stereotypes of her. And I will admit I have not read it, but I have it on good authority that this is a good book. Because everyone knows me, I have all these books behind me and I've never read any of them. I literally just collect them, which is so bad, and I know that. But this is what I've heard is a very good book about her specifically. It's a little old. I'm sure there are some more updated, smaller versions of it. I don't even know when this dates to.
There is
1990.
one book for those interested in learning about the Ptolemaic family tree, more specifically the Cleopatras and the women of the Ptolemaic family. It's called the Forgotten Queens, and it's by, let me have a quick, I think his name's Lloyd Lewin Wells. I think I have 2 copies of the book. I'll just have a quick. But
Yeah.
that it lays out a really Lloyd Lewin Jones, and it gives a really good family tree, which I think is something very helpful, especially with the Ptolemies, who so many of them married each other. So many of them are named Ptolemy, and so many of them are named Cleopatra. So it gives a really good breakdown of the family tree, but it also sheds a little bit more light into the forgotten queens of the Ptolemaic family, which is something I recommend looking into if you're interested in that.
I'm typing that in chat now. Lloyd.
It's called The Cleopatras, The Forgotten Queens of Egypt.
Yeah, I've got it up on my phone. But I'm just trying to spell his last name. Llewellyn Jones. There we go. And then this one is Cleopatra, Histories, Dreams, and Distortion. I totally spelled that wrong. Distortions by Lucy Hughes Hallett, for anyone who's interested. All right, you ready for the next slide?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Okay, so this is a very simple comparison of Greece and Rome against Egypt. Whilst you'll notice that there are a lot of things in common, such as the domestic duties and male-dominated societies, there are also large differences between the two. At face value, at least for me, it's obvious that women in Egypt exercised a greater freedom both publicly and privately. And these comparisons extend beyond royalty and power and go into regular everyday life for what we have evidence for. Women in Egypt, they were equal to men virtually in everyday life. They had the legal rights, they could buy and sell property, they had political authority if they had greater influence. In Greece and Rome, particularly as we enter into the Roman Empire, women weren't allowed in public spaces without a male relative or male guardian. And that's something to be incredibly mindful about when we talk about freedom and women, especially in Western ancient civilizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the one of my favorite things that I remember learning was about, we have so many records from Deir Medina, about kind of upper middle class, because they were kind of selectively specialized, for those who lived in this workman's village. Um, but we have a lot of records from there. Like we have in exponentially more records from this one location than a lot of other places. And I know I've read different records of like um, divorces between like men and women, and also I believe there's also one that is wills, and there was I'm not remembering the specifics, but I believe there were like wills where certain kids were given things from the mother and certain kids were given stuff from the father. But it was literally like, oh, they got 4 kids, 2 kids are getting stuff from the mother and 2 kids are getting stuff from the father. And it's very like odd in a way, but it is like showing that there is like this woman had a lot of personal goods, that it's also not a combined like family household sort of in the same way that we sort of see today. And it's a very interesting concept, because people have asked me sometimes about like what were Egyptian marriages like, and we know like virtually nothing sort of. And then one of the only things we sort of know is there's a word, and I made a video on this like so long ago. I know it starts with a G sound, like maybe gemg or something, but it is used in a lot of different, like as most Egyptian words are, but one of its ways that it's used for marriage, because it essentially just means setting up a house or like moving in together, and that is like all there is.
They didn't have like formal marriage contracts.
Mm-hmm.
They paid like I was looking into this the other day and I can't remember. I think it was the father of the bride would pay the husband the dowry, and if a woman, so men and women could initiate divorce in Egypt, where I think in Greece and Rome it was typically more men, and women, not to get too touchy about it, but women were shamed in Greece and Rome in some circumstances if divorce was initiated. So I think that's just like marriage and divorce alone, that's a huge amount of freedom in an ancient culture, to grant a woman the ability to marry someone and then initiate a divorce. That alone, that's a huge amount of power for women.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's something that seems kind of arbitrary in a lot of, when you're comparing it to much more modern cultures, but like it's a necessity in a lot of ways, having that open power to kind of decide whatever you want. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. We can move along to the next.
Alrighty. I gotta get to the back to the other page. There we go. Nope. Take a second. All
right. So without overcomplicating everything too soon, this is a timeline of ruling women. I've picked 5 from this small list, and I'll introduce them properly shortly. There's a few women that we have, like Cleopatra, like a lot of information about, and we have a huge timeline of events starting virtually from her reign right down to her death. Other women where we kind of speculate a lot, which I'll go over and I'll touch on. These are royal women and women who held influence that were to a greater extent than that of the empires in Greece and Rome. And it was to such an extent that Greece and Rome, I personally believe, wouldn't have allowed women in their society to go to, if that makes sense. It's a power that they wouldn't have granted women. Of course, in Greece and Rome, you do have women who played a huge role in the success of their husbands, such as Lydia for Augustus, but she was still very, very much kept to the side, kept to the private circle. She wasn't someone like Nefertiti or Cleopatra who really stepped into that powerful role, which is something to definitely keep in mind of. There isn't a lot of information, but I'll kind of go through that. There is a timeline of ruling women that I haven't included, mostly because of how much we don't really know about them. Did you put together, I think you mentioned that you were going to.
I did not get, unfortunately, to it, but the difficult part about like royal women, that a lot of the very, very, very early ones, like you have Merneith at the very top. Like there are a lot of women that have been suspected to be, and the problem is I find that most of the ones that we sort of are on the fence about, if they actually did sort of rule, most of the time seem to be in some sort of regency like dilemma, that there is no, that the next heir is very young, and so the women are kind of stepping forward to be that regent, and then that still in and of itself is not the same thing as like fully ruling. And a lot of times I find that the evidence that we have for this regency really only has to do with the potential age or the potential reign of that child. Because Egyptologists for such a long time have been relying on these kings list that list off all of the names of the kings, and in some cases list off how many years they ruled. And I find Egyptologists have become very like they cling to that. They cling to that because they need that timeline. And so if they're like, well, this doesn't make sense, like if this guy was 3 years old, then how was he ruling? And everyone kind of freaks out, and then they're like, well, his mom might have still been alive, and like it really just like there's not a lot of evidence, and sometimes it's literally just seeing the name of that female in a cartouche, like,
Yeah.
or
And
in
I
a
think,
Sarek if we're talking like really early, but like in that royal seal essentially.
yeah, I think even the point you made about them, potentially that ruling aspect is just as a co-regent, that in itself, Rome and Greece didn't allow that.
Yeah,
They didn't
very true.
allow women to step in, which I think is why I included women like Nefertiti and Hatshepsut, who, like Hatshepsut, she played the first part of her role into power was stepping into that co-regent aspect.
Yeah.
And that's something, like, even looking at the timeline, that's something that Egypt obviously didn't care for.
Yeah.
Like, they weren't opposed to women stepping in. They had no issue with that.
Yeah.
Whereas Greece and Rome, you're like, no records, no,
Yeah.
very
No.
obvious that women, that was not a role women could have.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, it's definitely like an option. It's obviously not a very common option, but there are still the list, like this is I would say the list that you kind of made here is almost a definite list. Like yes, we know minus a little bit of a TA, but like we know these people like these women actually did rule. The speculative list is much longer. And again, the regency is like the I always forget the succession crisis. Succession crisis is always a really big deal, and that seems to be mostly the reasoning for these crises. Like for the most part, I actually think most of the women here are kind of because of succession crises and really young heirs and co-regencies and stuff. And then a lot, but at the same time, like they can kind of take that power. Like Hatshepsut is the big example of that she's just like, just gonna take a little bit more, and then essentially take all of it. And so it's a very interesting kind of middle ground where it's like none of these women, semi kind of minus Cleopatra, really like were sort of granted that rulership. Like a lot of these were
Yeah.
kind of either there was nobody else or they kind of took it rather than it just being the norm. And so that
Mm.
is this weird little like line to kind of draw on where you're like it's not 100% acceptable because then they would allow female heirs to be the first one, but it's also not unacceptable because they still did it.
Yeah,
um,
they still have them.
yeah, so it's a very interesting like line to draw because and it's hard to make kind of those assumptions about like politics and about everyone's like kind of personal beliefs because of course we're also talking about 5,000 years of history. Everyone's beliefs are going to change and they're going to be like sometimes they're going to be like, well, we don't got any other choice, and it's like, oh no, maybe she'll do okay. Like we don't, those are things that unfortunately the sad archaeologists will never be able to nail down or figure out. I wish time machines were a thing because it would just be a bajillion times
You
easier
also
to figure all
have
this
to
out.
keep in mind with that, like women's history, especially like in the early 19th and 20th century, women's history was just not studied.
No.
It was like women were just not studied.
Yeah.
They were deemed like, so, and if you go back and you read the literature specifically about Cleopatra,
Mm,
like I personally find it so disgusting
yeah.
because it's just the views that they pop onto her,
Mm,
they're not accurate. And
mm,
they really put her into a box, which is why so many people still harbor those views
yeah.
about her today.
Absolutely. And it's also like a lot of early Egyptology was only studying the pharaohs. And so, like,
Mm.
yes, these women, they did get their share of like 5 minutes of fame of getting studied. But there are also so many royal women that did not rule or were just queens that are virtually never like studied because they didn't kind of step into that role. Lately, I've been earlier this month we did a lecture about the Hyksos people, and one of the queens that I love that we know so little about. I do believe there are theories that she may have taken over in a kind of regency role. Is Ahahotep, and there's also the Ahahotep crisis because there are potentially two women named Ahahotep from the exact same time period, and nobody can figure out how they are related to uh, um, Senkeneri Tao and Kamos and Amos. But like her husband was killed in battle against the Hyksos, and then her son goes and her son is killed in battle, and then her second son is the one who kind of takes over and reunites Egypt. And we know so little about her, and honestly don't even have any sort of image of her. Like no image of her survives, though we're very lucky with that we have a good amount of items like that were in her burial or potentially her daughter's burial. um yeah, Xavier, I see you on TikTok. I think one was Senkeneri's wife and the second was their daughter. Yes, and that's the prominent theory, but it's still not really confirmed because they might be the same people, and that's like super confusing. um, but she is somebody that I've always thought about a lot because I was like, oh wow, like those intermediate period women don't get studied, don't have enough, um, and it's really hard to figure that out. Absolutely.
Mm. Okay, we can move along if you like.
I have a quick question from you from over on TikTok. From
Mhm.
Earthling Jake says, do we know if women were limited in land ownership in those times and places? So we'll say in ancient Egypt versus like Greece and Rome. Do you know anything about this? I think I maybe know a little bit about Egypt, but not as much as I think I should.
I know that women could buy and sell property. In Egypt, they had the ability to do that. Um, Greece and Rome, I think, sort of coming, I'm not 100% sure, but I think coming into the Republic period,
Mm,
they had a lot more freedoms. But when you get to like the Roman Empire, like nothing, they had
yeah.
nothing. But yeah, definitely in Egypt, from the small amount of study that I've done on it, they did have that freedom to buy and sell.
Yes. And Sonia on TikTok also says divorce documents say a lot about this. This is what we were talking about like 5 minutes ago. I was talking about interesting divorce documents and wills and things like that from Egypt, like in the New Kingdom and places like Deir al-Medina. We have a lot of records about that, giving us very nice look into women of that time. Oh, Xavier. Sorry, this is a very good question. Do we know of any pharaohs getting a divorce? No. I can pretty much definitively say.
I think they all. I think they all just like use their wives to have kids and then like promoted to great royal wife.
I cannot think of anyone like one we wouldn't. It's unfortunate. We don't have as many royal record. Like Deir al-Medina is this just really weird case where so many of their records from this like kind of upper middle class like group is like preserved, and so like we don't have as much of like royal records. I would say it's kind of a silly answer, but the only one that I know of is like the assassination of Ramses III. Like it's not a divorce, but he's not married to any of his wives anymore. Like but yeah, I have a weird like inkling in the back of my head that there was a foreign wife probably in the New Kingdom that was like refused, but that's not really the same thing as being like as getting a divorce from one. But yeah, pharaohs would have the great royal wife, and they'd probably have like maybe 2 to 3 other wives, and then they'd usually have a lot of foreign wives that were essentially like gifted, which is kind of awful, but like gifted to the pharaohs from all the different nations that wanted peace and such, betrothed or whatever the word for it is. And then we don't even really know a lot about them either. There's only a handful that I can think of. There are the three foreign wives of, oh god, which Tutmos is it? I think it's the third. I think it's Tutmos the third. Were found in a tomb in Deir al-Bahri, and so I think those are I think that would make it Tutmos the Third's. And a lot of their stuff, a lot of the excavation was done by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and so a lot of their items are at the Mets. There's a lot of gold sandals and such. Very good point, Kiratissa. This is definitely a one of the reasons why I say ancient Egyptians were pretty prejudiced against everyone else besides them. And so they would see Egyptian women as equals, but they would probably see everybody else as like any other woman and any other person. I don't like to use the word racist, but they kind of were. It was very much in their mindset that the Egyptian world was order and everything outside the Egyptian world was chaos, and that included the animal world as well, and so that the Egyptians had to keep the order over the chaos, which involved like conquering, not always as much, like different time periods they didn't do as much of it, but it is the viewpoint of a lot of them to see like, yeah, ethnocentrist. Yeah, absolutely. That's another great word. That's why I usually use prejudice, because it's just like, it's not exactly the same thing. They just like, they think they're better. They're nationalistic. They think they're better than everybody else. Which is also difficult talking about history, because you can pretty much think most things that you read in ancient Egypt, especially if you know it's being written by like a pharaoh, it's probably a flat out lie.
Especially, and then that's true about art as well, though.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at artworks and statues commissioned by pharaohs and royal people, that's how they want themselves to be portrayed. Forget about
Absolutely.
everyone else and forget about what you actually look like.
Yeah.
You're setting up,
Yeah, absolutely. As idealistic as they would like. It differs back and forth. There are some times that you'll see. I love oh my gosh, who is the one with the really big ears from the Middle Kingdom? I can't remember his name right now. But there's a pharaoh that always depicted himself with like really, really big ears and this very sad jowl and these like big lines around his, and he always just looks so sad. And I'm blanking on it Mentuhotep? That might be Mentuhotep. But yeah, it depends on the time. But everything is still. I honestly say sometimes to make it easier rather than saying like, oh, it's idealistic, as I say technically everything is propaganda, and propaganda doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Propaganda is just using a media of some sort to convey a particular idea. And like in the Egyptians' case, it is a lot of idealism, it's a lot of nationalistic, like kind of that way, but it is in its own way just by making somebody look younger. Like, oh my god, Ramses is a great depicting himself as like the youngest, hottest bod. That was my favorite part about Egypt, is that my dad is a little bit slower in getting things. He's not doesn't absorb stuff very quickly, but very quickly he finally would be like, I think that's Ramses, and I'm like, good job, Dad, you figured it out. Like Ramses, he just gotta look. He's gotta look, and we went up and just were like, yeah, absolutely, Dad, you got it. That's it. One last question from Xavier before we move on. What's your favorite ancient Egyptian art piece, Gwen? Do you have one? Sometimes it's hard to pick one because I have my two, but I will see if you have one.
I don't have any in particular. I think I love a little bit of everything. Like, I am that person who like goes to an exhibition or something and like everything. I can't pick. I think religious beliefs are some of my favorites. I think they're some of the most beautiful. But I don't have a favorite.
I am like I like everything. But I most lean towards like physical artifacts that like a person actually would have like held. Love scribal palettes, love things like that. But because of the very distinct difference between like, I prefer the functional items, because people for a very long time, people have always said, oh, ancient Egypt, it's all aesthetic, it's all art. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Everything was functional to the Egyptians. Like, everything was meant to convey some sort of this propaganda, this meaning. But when I pick, like, the art pieces, like, the things that I think are, like, the most beautiful, there are two. And they're both, I think, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And they're both from the Amarna period, because I'm obsessed with the Amarna period. And one is the lips of Akhenaten. So because all of his statues were like kind of destroyed, it's only like the bottom half of like his really voluptuous lips. And then, which I have like a little dish in the back that has the image and has like the information card. And then the other one, which is I think my all-time favorite, is a piece of yellow jasper, I think, of a female face from the Amarna period. Again, only the lips. And it is like the most beautiful yellow you've ever seen. Like, very rarely are any statues made out of this stone, so it's just like gorgeous. But I will say I finally saw it in person, and I think the lighting was just literally horrible because it looked brown, and I was like, but the pictures, it's like this beautiful mustard yellow. And but that is like my all-time like favorite piece. If you look it up, like, I think it's called Lips of a Woman and then Amarna period, the Met, you'll find it pretty quickly. All right, let's go on to talking about our lovely ladies.
Yes, so I am going to start from reverse chronological order. I think for me, that makes it a little bit less confusing. But as I was typing up my points, I'm like, actually, it's more confusing.
As long as it's in really any chronological order, that's fine with me. I actually love it putting it in reverse. I don't know why. That's fun. I just
I'm just like, it's more tangible going from like the closest to us backwards. But if it's confusing, I am very sorry. No. I do try and make points throughout the lecture, but hopefully it's not confusing. I will refer to Cleopatra the Eighth just as Cleopatra. That's sort of just how I talk about her. Mm-hmm. But if you prefer I use Cleopatra the Eighth, I'm happy to do that. So I'll give a brief sort of overview of her sort of reign and span, and then I'll go into some issues that I think arise when talking about her. And I'll give like a little comparison about women in Egypt at this time and her compared to women in Greece and Rome. So she reigned from 51 to 30 BC, and she is the last of the Ptolemies, who descended from Ptolemy I, or Ptolemy Soter, who was Alexander the Great's general. He acquired Egypt upon the death of Alexander and established himself in Alexandria. I think that's pretty well known. As I said before, the Ptolemaic family tree gets very confusing very quickly. I'm not going to digress into it because it is a lot. They all married each other. They all
All
share
of the
pretty much the same
exact
name.
same names. Yeah.
So confusing.
There's one male name and there's like 3 female names, and that's it.
Literally. So if you are interested in the Ptolemaic family tree, definitely look it up and sort of look around because, as you will see, it gets very entwined and linked. But that's a whole other tangent. So she was the second daughter of Ptolemy the 12th, and she had 5 siblings. The Ptolemies are known to be pretty power hungry. Cleopatra and her siblings not exempt from that at all. They were also not born into the ideal situation for a royal family. Ptolemy the 12th owed money to the Romans. He was known for being quite gifty, taking loans, that sort of thing, and he was eventually exiled by the Romans from Egypt. We love. A few siblings at this time scrappled for power, and then before his return, a few of those, like Bernice, she eventually died because she kind of took it too far. And then Cleopatra and the 2 young Ptolemies were placed as Ptolemy the 12th's next of kin. So if something were to happen to him, they would step in and sort of take over. This is a very crucial stage for Cleopatra, and it's where we see her make the moves that she needs to situate herself in Egypt as a future and potential ruler. To make everything make a little bit more sense for the rest of this lecture, time, as you will see, moves backwards, I guess, if that helps. So we start in 51 BC with Cleopatra stepping into the position of co-ruler with her brother Ptolemy XIII upon their father's death. And then in 50 BC, Cleopatra flees to Syria as her brother and his followers drive her out of Egypt and out of power. In 48 BC, we have the infamous Julius Caesar and Pompey conflict that reaches Egypt and Pompey dies. Cleopatra famously meets Caesar in a carpet delivered to his room, and then from there, we have that whole...
The rest is history.
The rest is history. In 47 BC, Ptolemy XIII dies by drowning in the river whilst fleeing from Roman troops, and Cleopatra marries her second brother, Ptolemy XIV, and they become co-rulers of Egypt. During this time, she gives birth to her son by Caesar, and Caesar is assassinated in 44 BC while Cleopatra is visiting Rome. She eventually returns to Egypt, and her husband, Ptolemy XIV, mysteriously dies. Can't say for sure if she had a hand in that, but I think it's pretty safe to say.
If it quacks like a duck, it might be a duck. Yeah.
So Cleopatra and then Caesarion, which is her son by Caesar, they become the rulers of Egypt. Around 42 to 41 BC, Octavian, later known as Augustus, so he gets known as Augustus once he becomes emperor of Rome, he claims heir to Caesar, and it's during that time that Cleopatra meets Mark Antony and their affair begins. Between 40 and 34 BC, Cleopatra gives birth to twins by Mark Antony, and he returns to Rome to marry Octavian's sister.
Ooh, the drama. That's just like so much drama.
In 34 BC, tensions between Egypt and Rome escalate, warranted, and Octavian launches an infamous propaganda war against Cleopatra and Antony. And this, it's in this time that we really, that's where all of the negative views and opinions and everything really start to come out about Cleopatra.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this, a lot of the propaganda that he put out ties significantly into his values and morals for how he wanted Roman women to be. And that's something I suggest if you're interested in the Roman Empire and Roman women during that time, absolutely have a little read into it because it's pretty interesting. In 31 BC, Rome declared war against Egypt and Cleopatra officially, and we have the Battle of Actium. In 30 BC, Cleopatra and Antony die, and Egypt becomes part of Roman Empire under Octavian.
Yeah.
That's a very brief, very quick.
So complicated.
Rundown.
It's genuinely so complicated.
Yeah. Literally. The worst part, I think, about it, digressing slightly, the worst part, I think, out of, I mean, there are many bad parts about it all, is that Octavian, so the children that Cleopatra had with Antony went to go live with Octavia, which is Octavian's sister. And she was, if you have a little bit of a read into her, it seems like all of the orphan children of the places that Octavian conquered, or Augustus conquered, they went to live with her.
Crazy.
She raised them. And you're like, really? Like, nowhere else for them to go?
Yeah.
Giving them to your sister
crazy.
who, you know, raising the children of her husband that had an affair. She's raising crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. I think it's very obvious from sources, evidence in the literature that we have about her, that had she had the right resources and potentially be given a better start in the royal court, she could have done some incredible things for Egypt. Like, she would have done some incredible things for Egypt in the ancient world.
Yeah. If she was like earlier in the Ptolemies, I think that she could have, absolutely. Because she had a much different perspective, I think, of Egypt than a lot of the Ptolemaic women and potentially even a lot of the Ptolemaic pharaohs kind of had. And like, I think her dad is not the best person that she could have like followed, essentially. And at that point, and it's also because this is always the thing about like timelines and like how Egypt's timeline is going on the line of like what is Greece and Rome doing is like Rome was strong-ish like around the time of Cleopatra, but people don't realize that like Rome wasn't totally a thing at the beginning of the Ptolemaic Empire. Like Rome rose extremely quickly. That's like what, 300-ish years that it started, like, because at the beginning of the Ptolemaic Empire we're talking about Alexander the Great, and we're talking about them and the Greece and the Macedonians and such. And so she's like at the, like, Rome is just sort of getting its start, like closer to her time. If she was in a time where Rome wasn't really around, I think she would have done amazing things, for sure.
Yeah, Rome really took off, I think, with Octavian. And which I think is just, it's funny given that Julius Caesar was assassinated for trying to do similar things to what Octavian did, right? But I also think that he was able to get away with it because of propaganda he put out about other empires at that time, such as Egypt.
Yeah, absolutely.
He really sort of drove like a really ugly picture of them, and as a result of that, fear was just instilled into the Roman people, and he was going to do great things for them. So
yeah, it's just like kind of wrong time.
Yeah.
Like if one of the earlier Cleopatras was as like strong-headed and willful as she was, I think it would have been a very different situation. And she's so interesting because it is also surprisingly, like, while we do have a lot of records, we don't have a lot of Egyptian records of her. And so it's hard to kind of go through the weeds of all of the propaganda and really try to see who she is, in my opinion, I don't even think we have a very good image of her, like, truly. I think too many years of propaganda and too many years of assuming a person, psychoanalyzing a person, we don't really have a good image of her. And I also, I hate people want to pick at her and say she's Egyptian or she's Greek, or, and this is a time period that, yes, is studied well, like the Ptolemaic Empire, but the thing that I always try to impose on people, like, this is a huge mixing pot of cultures at that time. Like, Alexandria was a fishing village before Alexander the Great came around. There was barely any sort of, like, huge Egyptian capital or anything like that. Like, those are in the south. Those are in, like, more southern. And also at that time, the Persians had taken over Egypt twice. And so did the Nubians. And so it's like, we're already so far removed from the, I don't like using the word pure, but like the Egyptian culture that you think of, that automatically kind of comes to your mind. We're already so far removed from it. And now we're also 300 years of Greeks ruling and living in Egypt. And it, like...
Which I think...
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I think that, you know, in itself, people, specifically people who don't study history or pay much attention to it, don't realise that the Ptolemies, they are Greek. They descended from Alexander the Great, who was Greek. They're not, they may have had, you know, a little bit of Egyptian in them, but they are Greek. And that's why so many of them, if you go through that family tree and you do a little bit of research on them, you'll be very quick to see that Cleopatra was probably one of the only Ptolemies who actually tried to adopt the Egyptian aspects of Egyptian culture. She learnt the language, as you can see in the pictures up there. She posed herself as Egyptian. I think in part relate perhaps to the Egyptian people at that time. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's a big... I always like to say that there has to have been some Egyptian in her, because I hate to say it. It's like, you can look at that family tree all you want, but DNA doesn't lie, and like things like that. Like the royal family, like, you know, these pharaohs probably have multiple wives they're sleeping around, and like, who knows? Like, it is not, I hate to say it, like, weirdly, it is not weirdly unreasonable if your wife cannot have a child and you need a child to be an heir, that you fake it until you make it, and a kid, like, shows up. Like, I don't think that is really that unreasonable, and it makes sense in my mind when it's like, you're the freaking king. There's nobody else to take over. So, like, if I have another wife and they have a child, yeah, just put it in. And so it's like, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that there is, like, some, like, when you're looking at it genetically, that there may have been, like, a more native Egyptian kind of person, like, coming into it and stuff. And so it's very complicated. And then I always am saying that, like, while you do see Cleopatra in this Egyptian garb, so, like, this is an image from Dendera, which I was so happy to see in person last year, and it's a temple built originally by her father that she expanded upon. And so it's an image of her and I'm pretty sure Caesarion, her son, on the next to her. And it's like, yeah, she's like in full Egyptian mode and stuff. And there's plenty of imagery of, like, Ptolemaic pharaohs in Egyptian outfits, but they're not wearing that in their daily life. Like, maybe they wear them on some sort of public event, but to be honest, like, who knows how many of those actually kind of come around. Like it's something that we don't have a lot of evidence for, that they, like, I don't know, rode a carriage through the town. Like, it's something that you just don't, like, you probably barely ever saw any sort of royalty kind of wandering around. Even like the older, like the original pharaohs, when they would have the ceremony every year of killing a hippo to, like, resemble, like, killing Set, they'd have a stand-in. The king's not doing it. They literally, we have records of a stand-in priest who's pretending to be the king because the king can't make it. Like, who knows how many people, like normal people, actually ever saw the Egyptian.
Right, which is why I say like art is such like it's such an incredible tool for
Absolutely.
analyzing royalty and I guess just everyday people. I mean, unlike today where you can, you know, edit and whatever a photo of yourself, and then you can also other people can also see what you look like in real life. The Egyptians didn't have that. So this is Cleopatra's idealized what she would want the Egyptian people to see, which yeah, I think potentially it helped ease the tensions at the time, keeping in mind that obviously the Egyptians were in a bit of a messy situation with her father.
Yeah.
Um, I think it, you know, her portraying herself like this with her son, and you know, learning the Egyptian language and really adopting all of that, I think really helped um, her solidify what she was going to do for Egypt and really I guess bring comfort to them that okay, we could potentially see some stability here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a unique way of doing things because there are lots of ancient cultures that when they take over areas, they completely want to assimilate you. But
Mm.
it was the even the Persians. The Persians did not really do that when they took over Egypt. They kind of were just like, yeah, it's fine. Um, just like do what you're doing. We own your property. Like it was very uh simple, a little bit more simple, and a lot of other cultures didn't do that. They're like, no, no, you're not allowed to practice your culture, your religion, nothing. You're now a blank. And so it's a very it's a very interesting way of ruling. Like, I hate to say it, you can see pluses and minuses on both versions of like if you're trying to
Absolutely.
conquer, there are pluses and minuses to either appease the culture that you are like conquering because hey, maybe then they'll like you. They'll like you're I'm not being opposing. I just want your land and stuff like that. Or the if these guys are allowed to kind of continue their culture, they might rise up against me and they might still like the whole I think it's a Roman maybe a Roman practice that they would like when they would conquer areas, they would take people and they would like essentially move them around. They wouldn't like leave them in essentially their homeland. They would kind of move them around, split them up to like literally just like confuse them and not let them have any chance to kind of take up and take your power. Just like
Mm.
understandable. It's cruel, but it's understandable. Like if that's what your goal is, you need to do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The next slide is sort of just a little bit of a brief, just some points that I think um, really stand out for Cleopatra against women in Rome and Greece at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she played a huge role in foreign affairs, particularly with Rome. And I think she used her sexuality to her advantage. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think all the more power to her for doing that.
Yeah.
I think like there's nothing. I think Rome. Honestly, I think they may have been intimidated by her, but in the sense that here's a really strong, powerful woman coming in to the picture, looking like she wants to take Rome, looking like she wants to be a player and part of this.
Yeah.
And potentially they were just intimidated by that. And as a result, we have Octavian's propaganda,
Yeah.
which really paints the picture of how a lot of people see her.
Yeah. And this actually ties in very nicely with Flickster's questions. How do you filter through the history to know what's true and what's a lie when dealing with women in ancient Egypt? And I think Cleopatra is probably one of them. We'll touch on things like that kind of in the rest of the lecture, but I think Cleopatra is the real one to answer with this because we know now that there are so many kind of lies. Like, so how do we have to go through kind of that filter? Um,
I think it's so tricky in the sense that so much of the literature that has come out about her is very early. Like you said before, you know, 19th, 20th century when all of the archaeological practices and everything started coming out. And they were all male historians.
Mm-hmm.
All male historians who I think really ran with the view that men had to rule, and a woman who, you know, who tried to step into that power was obviously after something for her own good. She wasn't, you know, it wasn't a space for women. And then you have to come at it with the lens of, am I putting a modern perspective onto an ancient context, which is hard. That's very hard to do. Very hard, because it's hard to dissect yourself from the time that you're living, the things that you consume, and then apply it to an ancient culture that we either know so much about or we know very little about.
Yeah.
So I think...
Yeah, this, for those who don't know, kind of the term for this is ethnocentrism. It was something that kind of hit me like a freight train when I learned it in a couple of my anthropology classes in college, because I was like, oh, like this is essentially the it's a term that I find is only really used in kind of modern anthropology, but I don't find it used as much when you are looking at ancient cultures in history or with historians or with archaeologists. And it's essentially it's that putting your modern perspective on it. And so it's like, let's say there are women in Africa that are topless pretty much every day of their life. And I look at them and I say, oh my God, that's so immodest. Like, they're just showing their boobs. That woman is probably looking at me and saying, why isn't she showing off her most beautiful part of her body? And it's like, it's that taking your standard of life and your knowledge of that and saying, anytime you're pretty much looking at something from history or another part of the world and you say, oh, that's weird, most of the time is going to be ethnocentrism. Like most of the time when you really, really look into it, you say like, oh wow, why do Americans put ketchup on everything? Like it's a little bit like ethnocentrism. Yeah, everything is cultural differences. And I find, just like Gwen was saying, that look at the authors, and this is like research 101. Look at the authors. Look at the time period that they are writing from. Look at the country that they're coming from. If you can't figure it out, look at their religious practices, because...
And especially like when they're coming from, you know, 19th, 20th century, look at what the expectations and values of that society was at the time. That's a huge indicator of how they're going to be writing about these women.
Yeah, and this is the same thing with like looking at very, very early racist theories about ancient Egypt, and that it is those people were living in a very much racist society, and so they are going to say, oh well, Egypt's in Africa, so that's I already look down on these people, so why would I change my opinion and such. And so it's very hard to have that unbiased opinion. It is very, very hard. And so like in some cases I understand. I feel bad, but I understand. Like, because you're if no one's contradicting you, you're just gonna write about what you know, and that's true. The other thing is that you really do have to kind of do the deep dive research. Sometimes you will not get nowhere, but I will give an example of one that is about Cleopatra that I did make a video on. It's a very funny subject, but there is this thing that you will see on social media. Last month, was it last month? Or 2 months ago, my lecture for this series was on the biggest misinformation campaigns of like modern Egyptology. So like, we're not talking about alien theory, we're not talking about conspiracy theories, we're talking about those things that just get passed around, these statements that are actually not true. And one of them that gets passed around about Cleopatra, which is a hyper specific one. Like it is like, it's about her sexuality, but it's a hyper specific one, that Cleopatra had the first vibrator. And it was made out of a box or gourd, because there are two different versions of this, filled with bees. And it is still passed around today. I literally, the way I did that video on TikTok was because I found these two girls on a podcast talking about it, and I stitched the video saying, this is not true. It's not very practical, friend at arms. But when you look into that statement, you literally can pinpoint it exactly and find the earliest version of this thing comes from a book, I believe from the 1980s, called what was it called? It was called like Practical Sex Life, or like it was a sort of a history of sexuality kind of book. And when you go to the book, it's just like dropped in there, no citation, no nothing. So like you either got to go ask the author where she got it. I think she might be dead, but it's like, and that's hard because if you do, so you find something from the early 1900s, well, you have to then unfortunately just kind of make that jump and say, if she's not going to cite where it comes from, how do I know that it is true?
Mm.
It doesn't mean you automatically say it's not. Sometimes you have to keep going researching because somebody might just not want to cite stuff, which always sucks. But when you reach a point where you can't prove it beyond a book that's less than 20 years old, like,
You gotta make that judgment.
yeah, you have to unfortunately make that. And that is just kind of the fraught of like academia, is that like at one point you just have to say, I cannot prove this. So you keep it with that salt. I always, you got to do the grain of salt just in case.
One thing I really like to do, I guess to really, position myself, particularly with Cleopatra, is I like to go through and I like to find the old works, like, the first stuff that started coming out about her, and then compare it to the most recent things that have come out, and you see very quickly when you read, open up an introduction of a book written in the 19th, 20th century about Cleopatra, and then you open up a journal or something written last year or the year before, very quickly you see how different the views and opinions of her are. And I think that's a really good indicator and a really good way to sort of weed out what's opinion versus what's fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fixer, like you said, like, why do topics like this have a place in history? Like, she was smart. For the longest time, people have only really put down her sexuality. And so, like, this is like a hyper-specific, example, but there are so many that have to do with her sexuality that is just like, she used sex to gain things, and like putting her down for that, because again,
so did men though. Like, men did that too, but you don't see them getting berated.
We had a comment like that in TikTok chat, said Caesar uses sexuality to his advantage, but you don't see anyone castigating it. Like, yes, like, this is not a uncommon thing. It's that women will get, and this is the other thing that's so funny, is that a lot of these, like, obviously we showed the difference. Gwen was talking about the differences between how women are viewed in Egypt and in like the Roman and Greek world, but like a lot of that, like, that in and of itself, Rome did not see women as powerful or as worthy to do that. So they are going to create that propaganda. And then at the same time, the men that were studying her also did not see her as worthy, because women unfortunately did not have as much power in that time as well. And it is only until very, very recently, and honestly, not even in all parts of the world, in some parts of the world, women are seen as worthy. Women have all these things. Do we still get all the shit all the time? Yes. Like, yes. Like, it's like they are taking their own preconceived notions about how they see the world, and they're pushing it on academia and history, and actually recording their own biases through this. And it's hard. And again, it is hard to not do that. But we gotta figure it out. Absolutely. Any last questions about Cleopatra? I have one that I do want to talk about, because if you like Cleopatra a little bit more than I do, I feel like we have to talk about it because I know people are going to probably ask. Um, what is your opinion about the tomb of Cleopatra and kind of all these things? I know it's the difficult question, and I have said mine multiple times, and I can say my opinion, but I again have not studied this section of ancient Egyptian history as much as a lot of other people. But this question has been thrown at me a bajillion times.
I am one of those people. I I'm a bit on both sides. Like I personally, I think as someone who like absolutely adores Cleopatra and loves her and has I study so much about her. For me, I would really love to just I don't yeah, I would really love for it to be um, found, and I would really love for that to become, I guess, known. Not so much as like a touristy sort of
Mm,
thing. I don't like that. But at the same time, I like she needs. I think it should just be kept private.
mm,
I don't think. Um, I think it would be an incredible find. Like really, it would be. It would make history, obviously. But at the same time, I think if Catherine does find her,
mm-hmm.
um, I think it should be kept sort of private, and she should just be left. I think.
So my further question is, this is kind of the distinction that I always have, is do you actually think there's a chance of finding like her and an actual intact burial, or because I always kind of separate the two. I think it is possible that we will find the place that we can assume Cleopatra was building as her tomb, because ancient Egyptian kings always built their tombs quite early. I think it is possible that we will find that tomb. I personally believe that she was not actually buried there. And that is
I'm
your same. Okay.
yeah.
I
I think we'll.
you go ahead.
Sorry. I think we'll find the place. I don't think we'll find her.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I have been on, and Xavier kind of says this, is that because she was so different than a lot of the other Ptolemies, I do believe that in her younger days she probably maybe wanted to be actually mummified. But whenever I tell people that we don't have a single mummy or human remain of any Ptolemy ever, to me that is not a coincidence, and I personally believe that they were probably all cremated and probably put in one big old family tomb that sunk into the ocean. um, and I personally just believe, because of the hectic like way that she went out, she did not have enough power to have enough people to be able to essentially take her body away and get it away from the Romans, and either do a full like mummification or do a full like cremation. I don't think she had the anyone really behind her enough to be able to do that. And the only thing that makes me doubt kind of my theory that I've come up with is that if the Romans had gotten their hands on her body, they would have been talking about it till kingdom come. And so that is weird that there's that gap. But then I also back and say, but they wouldn't like that she committed suicide. They would rather have taken her alive. So maybe that is the reason there is this gap, is that they just would rather not talk about it, and they just decided to like cremate her and get it over with and kind of end it kind of like that. But there's a lot that I'm just like, I don't I think we could possibly find a place that she would have liked to be buried. I don't think we will ever find her. I don't think we will ever find an intact tomb, and I don't think, like, I truly think it's at the bottom of the Mediterranean. That's kind of my personal theory, because it is just kind of based on like logical ness and just how crazy it was. And Flickster, there have been some updates on her search, but the thing that is very funny is that Kathleen Martinez, while she is looking for Cleopatra's tomb, that is not the goal of her excavations. And the media and social media have really clouded that. She is known as the woman who wants to find the tomb, but that cannot be the actual scientific question or goal of her excavation. That's not how excavations work. She is just investigating a temple that she suspects might be connected with Cleopatra. And she's discovered a crap ton of stuff there. She has this huge like aqueduct thing that's going all the way to the Mediterranean. They found the what is it called? Dedication stone, something like that. That for the dedication of the temple, they found that, which was really, really big deal. And also, excavations are only like a couple weeks every single year, so you can't excavate there for. There's also another group actually that's excavating in the same area. But yeah, like excavations is like 5 weeks out of a year, and then you have to go back to work to then prep for the next year of excavations. So, did you find a statue of Cleopatra's sister? I think it was an anonymous princess, but I'm kind of blanking on that at the moment, Xavier. That's a very good question. But I don't think anything definitive. I think it was just like a female figurine. I can't remember.
Was that the head that they found?
I think the head. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, from the little bit that I read about it, they can't say definitively that it was Cleopatra. They don't, because it doesn't really look like the other portraits we have of her. I would like to think that, I think she had a pretty good relationship with the Egyptian people, and I would like to think that they were very saddened by her death, given the circumstances of it. So I would like to think that potentially we might find some sort of, not altar, but some sort of place where people came and I guess grieved for her, and grieved for the fact that they were now under Roman occupation.
Yeah.
I would like to think that we'd find something like that, but again,
I definitely agree. I think that's definitely a possibility, but it just depends how much the Romans hated her to see that potentially destroyed. And the difficulty is that almost the majority of things about her are going to be focused in Alexandria, and Alexandria is such now a massive city that unfortunately there have been too many atrocities where archaeologists have had to relocate people's houses that it's unfortunately not worth it to relocate modern people's houses. It's a difficult line to cross, but things like that have happened in Luxor where they completely dismantled an entire village just to find the tombs underneath is just not acceptable kind of in our modern world. So no one's yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, you go.
No one's gonna destroy all of Alexandria for some art. Like, you would need like such definitive proof to be able to do it, and to be honest, it would be too risky, I think, to just like take down a whole building just to investigate something when there's been so many atrocities like that in Egypt. Like, it's just not worth it for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, ready to move on? I know we always talk about Cleopatra so much.
I knew that if I was going to digress about anyone, it would be her. So.
Absolutely.
So next up is Nefertiti, and she is perhaps the most comparable to women in the West, to an extent. Mm-hmm. So rare women like Livia, who is Octavian's wife, could influence and express power privately in things like decision making and some cases religion. Women in Greece and Rome were still very submissive and expected to be mothers and wives first and foremost. That was their duty domestically. They were confined to the home. Nefertiti, she didn't definitively solve all. I'll get into that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but she is very much, her role next to her husband is very similar to a lot of ancient Greek and Roman women who their husbands were emperors or ruling. Um, she was incredibly influential in religion. Um, she is very much seen as a co-ruler and equal. Um, she is, yeah, I personally think she is incredibly influential, and I think she had a lot of power. And I think we don't have a lot about her because she does disappear from the historical record.
Mm-hmm.
But just the art itself really speaks volume about the power that she had.
Absolutely. Because queens sometimes appear in art with their husbands, but really, like, not as much. And it depends on the time period. I would say in the New Kingdom, even after the Amarna period and Nefertiti and Akhenaten, you see them more often than you probably would in previous dynasties. And a lot of the times, if you're seeing a queen, most of the time it's in their own tomb. Like, it's not this public art, which it ramps up in the Amarna period and in the New Kingdom in general. Um, she's always the Amarna period's my favorite. I try not to be biased because I say that the Amarna period tends to be the gateway drug of Egyptology because it's like Tut and Akhenaten, because it's like Tut's the most famous one, and then when you learn about Akhenaten, the mystery and the him being so different, and then the weird art, like that tends to bring a lot of people in. And I want to be a cool Egyptologist, and I like the niche things, but this is what I have always liked, and know way too much about it and her. Um, but yeah, she's a very, and in a lot of cases, she's also probably not related to Akhenaten, which is also kind of a rarity in Egyptian pharaohs and their wives. She's probably not related to him at all. And so I always pointed out, people are always like, well, Tut is all weird because his parents, he's got all this ancestral. I'm like, okay, in Akhenaten's family, yes, but not his parents, which is the biologically worse, is if your parents are related. But his parents were not related. We pretty much are almost 100% on that one, at least.
Mm. I think going back to what my favorite pieces of art would be, I would say that, like, religious, so Akhenaten and Nefertiti, they're in that relief. Like, I look at that and I'm like, that is, just looking at that, you can see evidently that she is obviously of some sort of power and influence. And I think her opinion, her influence was appreciated
Yeah.
by Akhenaten, and I guess the Egyptian people as well. Otherwise, I think they wouldn't have kept producing
Yeah,
art like this.
exactly. And even in the simplest
Yeah.
way, when you look at that relief, I know I've talked a little bit about like the art canon and such, but like she is pretty much the exact same size as Akhenaten. Like, you can tell she's maybe a little smaller, but so much so that it looks more realistic rather than the hierarchic scale, which for those who don't
Mm.
know is the most important person is going to be the biggest in the image. And she looks sort of like on the more stereotype of like men are larger, women are smaller, like not in the same as like I am the most important, so my wife is going to be 5 inches tall in comparison to like my 6 feet tall stature, which is what you see all the time, but you see especially in like the Ramesside period, and things like that. And Iron Chef, oh yes, this is all like, even though the Amarna period is different and has a very different function of their art, It's absolutely propagandistic. Like, this is showing the royal family being blessed by the god the Aten. Like, because it is very much, it's different in the sense that, like, other Egyptian pharaohs, it was really only the dad, the pharaoh. He's the son of Ra, and that's it. The Aten blessed the whole family, as you can see. Like,
You have to keep in mind as well that during the time of his reign, Egypt was going through sort of like a religious revolution. So he really tried to change the game of Egyptian religion. And so the art style, of course, reflects that because he's trying to promote this new religion and get people on board with that.
Iron Chef. So this art was produced during her lifetime. Yes, it's a little. It's not always 100% easy to tell, but both of these images were the lucky thing about the Amarna period. Here's the very, very lucky thing: the Amarna period entirely is ruled out, almost entirely ruled out of a brand new city that Akhenaten decided to build. He's kind of, I have psychoanalyzed this man so many different ways in my mind, but he believes himself to sort of be this prophet of this Aten, which is this genderless, not even non-humanoid form. It's just that sun that you see kind of here in the center with all the little hands coming out. And the Aten told him that this is the place to build this new city. And this city is only occupied for like 14 years. So the lucky thing is that as soon as Akhenaten dies and Tutankhamun begins to rule, there was a couple years that they probably stayed still in Amarna, but then they almost immediately went back to the way things were, and they left, and they completely abandoned the city, and nobody pretty much ever lived there ever again. So that is like, I honestly, that's like prime, that is what all archaeologists wish for, because that makes the timeline of all the things that they find so short and so specific, when that is usually absolutely nowhere near the case. And you are having to sift through multiple thousands of years of archaeology to be able to determine whether or not something is coming from that particular time period or coming from later. So yes, most of these things were made. Actually, no, I'm going to say all of these things were made during Nefertiti and Akhenaten's reign, because the other great thing about this time period is that everybody after them hated them. So they would definitely not be making any of this art. And then there was one question from Xavier. Wasn't Akhenaten's mummy exceptionally tall? I'd have to double check on that, but I don't really think so. He's got some weird stuff. We actually don't have a mummy. He's actually a skeleton, if I remember correctly. I think he was in really bad shape, so I think we only have a skeleton. There are some oddities. He's got a little bit more feminine shaped hips and things, and he's got a weird little skull. But I'd have to look that up. I don't think he was exceptionally tall. But yeah, Nefertiti and Akhenaten. I'm just obsessed with them.
So yeah, around the 12th year of his reign, she disappears from historical record. There are a lot of theories as to why. Some people suggest that potentially she died. Potentially, like I think a theory might be that I think their daughter died. Potentially that she was just erased from history by the successors of their family. It's possible, honestly, that we just don't even have enough evidence for her after this period, given how quickly they went back to tradition, how quickly they moved on from this period. But there is a theory suggesting that she came back into the picture after her husband's death under a different name and ruled Egypt for a short period. The next slide, I included a little bit more information on this, but there's very little to know. Very, very little. It does appear that the artistic and religious practices that Akhenaten and Nefertiti kind of promoted, changed, and really pushed during their reign. A little bit of evidence to suggest that they did continue during the supposed Nefertiti sole rule, but again, they were very quick to move back tradition after this period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for those who haven't heard these names before, the two, they're just completely giant question marks. And that is Neferneferu Aten and Semenkare, which is over here. And the problem essentially is that we have these guys' names in the royal cartouche, indicating that they are a pharaoh, and we find them in Amarna, in the location of it, and I think maybe some other places, but where they go in the timeline doesn't make any sense. Like, and they're not really written about because this whole time period was trying to be wiped out of existence and stuff. And it's just like, it's very, very confusing. Cartouche is French for to encircle. It's very stupidly fancy. I don't even know what the Egyptian word is for it, but I believe cartouche is a French word for to encircle because it's a giant circle. So Xavier, some people believe that Nefertiti is only Neferneferu Aten, and there's also the potential that Semenkare was an unrelated male figure, possibly a husband of one of the daughters, because again, Tut was really young, so we're in the succession crisis, as per what we were talking about earlier, and that possibly Semenkare was like maybe engaged to be married or something, or was coming into the family and was, but it's just like, we know nothing. We know so
little. We have nothing at all.
Which
I think
little.
is really hard.
Yeah.
So hard. And I would like to think that potentially she'd come back into the picture, and potentially use a different name to distance herself from the changes that had happened, potentially, to get along better with the Egyptian people and kind of move things back along. But like, that's just a theory. There's nothing to suggest that that's what happened.
I've always found it very fascinating that, like, Akhenaten changes his name to Akhenaten. His name was Amenhotep the Fourth. Not really the fourth, just Amenhotep. But he changes his name to Akhenaten. All of his children have the Aten in his name. But Nefertiti most likely did not change her name. Like, there's no indication in that it has anything to do with the Aten. And so that, like, potentially, the reason why people associate Nefertiti only with Neferneferu Aten is because of the Nefer. Nefertiti itself, I think, means, like, the most beautiful of beautiful, I think, something along that lines. Yeah. And then Neferneferu Aten would probably be the most beautiful of the Aten, something along those lines. Because that's what that word Nefer means. And so people just kind of make that connection, which is like, yeah, it's not the biggest jump. I do just always find it fascinating that she didn't have that name when they adopted the Aten. Like, she's just out of the like Tutankhamun was Tutankhaten, and Ankh-Senamun was Ankh-Sen-Pa-Aten, and Merit Aten, and like all of their family had the Aten in their name, but she did not, and I don't know why. And that's always been kind of that weird inkling, like, why? That doesn't make any sense. And I know of another theory, when I was doing research on the Amarna period in college, that there was a small time period where it appears that Tutankhamun, when he is actually taking the throne, that he still is living in Amarna. Very short, like a year or two, maybe 3. The theory, I believe, was, I'd have to look into it a little deeper, but I believe it was put together by Barry Kemp, the Egyptologist, who, RIP, died last year, who had worked on the Amarna project since the 70s. and excavated there for literally almost his entire career, that potentially Nefertiti was still alive at that time, and that she was still raring to go with the Aten religion, was like really trying to stick it out and trying to make it happen, maybe as a regent, as Neferuaten, as a regent over Tutankhamun. And that the only reason that they officially kind of left was because she died. And that it showed how much control she had, and that she really was just trying to keep on her husband's legacy. But again, a lot of it is kind of conjecture, because she does disappear in the 12th year of his reign. I think that, and the plague idea is also out there a lot, because we do know that the daughter died, and there's evidence archaeologically that a lot of people died at a quick succession, and there was some sort of disease that was going through. And it's odd that we don't have imagery or records of maybe her funeral, because you would think it would be a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And no good royal tombs for them either. It's very, very, very confusing, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think like just her influence alone, like to be able to influence, Akhenaten and be positioned in such a way that, like, quite literally in that last slide, she is virtually visibly equal to him. I think like that's just something you don't get in Greece alone. And she may not have ruled solely on her own, she may have, but the very fact that she is pictured like that with her husband is significant. The very fact that she is portrayed as an equal in such a powerful way, like that's significant. That says that she had a lot of influence, she had a lot of control, she was a decision maker, she was appreciated, she was accepted.
Absolutely. All right, let's my other favorite one.
So this is Queen T. She is the mother to Akhenaten, so the mother-in-law to Nefertiti. And she was an incredibly influential woman. She co-ruled with her husband, and she is the first Egyptian queen to have her name recorded on official acts and documents. She is also not of royal blood, which is, she came from an influential family, but she is not of royal blood, which I think, like, that alone, her coming in and stepping in to such a big role and having the power that she has, that's incredible. Absolutely. Really just incredible. She had a lot of influence in Egyptian courts and in public. She participated in festivals and state affairs, which at this time period was uncommon for queens. There is some literature about her that discusses the influence that she may have potentially found influence from Nubian queens, who at this time were known for being involved heavily in courts and in disbursements of power, but we don't know definitively if that's how she sort of came about stepping into that role. Perhaps she just saw an opportunity and proved herself to be an intelligent counterpart to the pharaoh. Who knows?
Absolutely.
Her influence extended beyond Egypt and into the wider ancient world, with evidence that foreign leaders contacted her directly, as opposed to pharaohs, which, again, in itself is significant. That's massive, right? Like, who else? At this time, the pharaoh was who you would contact. The pharaoh was who you would make negotiations with. But the fact that they're going, screw the pharaoh, screw your husband, let's go directly to you.
Yeah. I don't know of anyone else, any other female person in ancient Egypt that really goes through either. Truly. There's not many.
Um, so I think, yeah, compared to women in Greece and Rome at this time who had very limited power, um, like really, she is just. I think she's one of my favorites in discussing this sort of compare and contrast because she just had, like, even Nefertiti, who came after her,
Mm-hmm.
she didn't have the same sort of influence that Queen T did. She didn't, no foreign leaders were corresponding with her. It's a really big.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I don't know if anybody has read any ancient Egyptian fiction, but my all-time favorite book is a book called Nefertiti by Michelle Moran. And I recommend Michelle Moran to everybody because she does very good research. It is fiction, it is fictionalized, but I do think she has like a lot of details. And I forgot to mention this earlier. Michelle Moran also wrote one about Cleopatra's children going to Rome. So sad, but it's very good, very well written. But Nefertiti is my all-time favorite because it gives a very unique perspective on the Amarna period because it is not in the perspective of Nefertiti. It is in the perspective of Nefertiti's sister, Mut Nojmet, who, like, the best way I can describe it is that that they portray Nefertiti kind of in not the best light, but it's in a kind of understandable light. Like, she's being portrayed as essentially like the bratty older sister who's like risen to power and like it's all going to her head. And I don't think I think you can still be a powerful woman and have kind of that perspective. But TA is in this book as well as essentially this kind of older wise woman who's already gone through it, who's the widow and stuff. And she's like one of the best characters in the book because this young girl like goes and talks to her a couple different times as she's living in Amarna because her son just like it's very much like my son just decided to pick me up and move me to Florida. Like it's like this very interesting perspective, and she does a lot of really good research like for all of her different books. But I've always liked how TA is kind of depicted in that because it is the more you think of the Amarna period, the more you think it's just like absolutely batshit crazy. Like, I'm gonna build a city in 5 years, and we're gonna
Change
move.
the religion.
Yeah, we're gonna change the religion. We're gonna change the art. We're gonna change people's names. Like, we're gonna do all of this crazy shit. And poor TA is kind of like, I guess I'm coming along. Like, it's kind of a very interesting and funny thing about her because I do think I think the way that she is portrayed in comparison to Nefertiti in that book, like it's hard to say something is like accurate, but like on a very basic psychoanalyst of like the mother-in-law with the daughter-in-law, a lot of it makes sense. A lot of it makes sense.
Yeah, there's a theory kind of going around that potentially, like, she was so influential that people think she influenced Akhenaten.
Mm.
There is a theory that I've heard that potentially she acted as a co-regent with him, but that's heavily debated. And it suggested that if that did happen, it didn't last for very long, only about a year or so.
Yeah, that one makes sense to me at least because the one thing that we do know about Akhenaten is that he was not the heir apparent. He had an older brother named Tutmos, and the way I've psychoanalyzed Akhenaten in a lot of senses is that we know he was a priest and he was in the priesthood, and I kind of take it on like that he had this insider's perspective of how the priesthood worked and hated it and was like, this is not the way because the priesthood was becoming more powerful than the pharaoh. And essentially when his brother unexpectedly dies, he's just like, well, you know what, it's not going to be the same now, like let's just change it. And I do think I think TA influencing him is super possible because people think that Akhenaten, like I'm saying, the general public tend to think that Akhenaten invented the Aten, but he did not. the Aten, the word Aten just means sun. It has existed before, and during Amenhotep III and Tia's reign, Amenhotep built her a barge that was called the Great uh, Royal Barge of the Aten. He literally used that, and it cracks me up every time because it's just like, did his dad just do something and like not invent this god, but kind of come about this god, and then Akhenaten just took it and ran? Like, it's just like, no, I want this one. This is the only thing. Because it is just very odd how it all kind of comes about. Oh God, I wish I could just time travel back to that time so I could figure it out. It does like annoy me all the time that I don't know.
Huge props to him. I find it just like digressing a little bit. I find it just incredible that he just decided, however he came about it, to just change the religion, something that had been around for so long.
Yeah.
And he really just thought like people were going to be so on board with that.
Yeah.
I kind of like wonder like if, you know, like how, like if he somehow could like see what happened after he died, like what would he, you know, like would he be like, oh, that didn't go the way I kind of thought it would, or
Yeah.
you know, like, yeah.
I've always thought about that too. Yeah.
I just find it so hilarious that he just really ran with that idea. And
it's one of the things somebody asked me, like, why I like the Amarna period so much, and one of my things was just like, in my like whole life, I've always admired people for doing whatever they really wanted to without any sort of judgment. Like things that like I loved Miley Cyrus when she went all crazy and people like hated her, and I loved Lady Gaga for just like, she did what she wanted to do. Like if it was crazy, she did it. Like, and I've always admired people like that, and when I really think about Akhenaten, that is how I see him. That he did it because he wanted to. Like you could go any different psychoanalyzing reasons. Like if he did it to spite the priesthood, if he did it just because he really did have a vision of the Aten, that like he just did what he wanted, and I can't not like fault him for that.
no,
Like,
and when
absolutely.
you've got that kind of power as Pharaoh, like who's going to tell you no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who's going to tell you don't do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Do what you want. Like, you got the power. You can do what you want. Even sometimes if you do a bad thing, like do it. Like, I'm not gonna fault you if you have all that power.
Yes, but I think that's sort of my little bit on her.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to find too much information. A lot of what I did find was that like she just had this really incredible amount of
Yeah,
power.
absolutely.
Which again, you have to applaud her for that.
Yeah, very much so. Oh yeah, here's the last thing. Definitely an advisor. That's like definitely the biggest, like if you can't like rule on your own, being an advisor is like your husband's the pharaoh. He doesn't have to listen to you if he doesn't want to. Like that is something that like also shows how much that pharaoh in particular like trusted and knew their spouse and said, well, I think her ideas are good. Like it's a two-man streak on that one. It's like that you need kind of both people to accept that. Yeah, she's got a lot of different stuff that she has going on in her head. And I truly wonder if that is, when you have Ta and Nefertiti both on their side, is that because they necessarily did not grow up royal, if that is kind of this outsider perspective. And nowhere near where they were commoners, but like they didn't grow up. They didn't grow up in it. They didn't know how the world works in that sense. They had a little bit more in the outside world.
Which I think, if you apply that to, I guess, like Greece and Rome at the time, like as if, you know, an emperor was gonna, you know, marry first of all a woman who was not from a royal family or an influential family, but then take on her queen as well. I think that in itself, like,
Very
I
much.
like she must have honestly been like a powerhouse.
Hmm.
And to think that like her husband could have, as Pharaoh, he could have listened to anybody else. Like he had other advisors. He
Yeah.
had many voices coming at him, telling him what he should and shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And instead of, people taking on listening to the people who that was their job, he listened to his wife.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right.
So she is a very famous woman on our list. Another one. Well, I mean, they're all famous, but I think even if you don't know much about ancient Egypt, Hatshepsut and Cleopatra are probably two of the most famous names that you're
Yeah.
hearing. At least you know a little something. So she reigned quite a long period, but some of this time is as a co-regent.
Hmm.
Um, I haven't sort of dissected the years from that, just because I think, like, you can look at her co-regent um, aspect as she did what she had to do as a co-regent, but I think she used that time to really set herself up for co-ruler. I don't think she was too concerned about losing that power when he came of age. I think she was like, okay, I'll step into this co-regent power and I'll
Hmm.
go full force with it.
Yeah.
Um, in 1473, she takes on the full pharaonic titles and becomes the sole ruler of Egypt. She is one of possibly three ruling women to have adopted male headdress and pharaonic titles, adopting elements of like a non-binary style to artistic depictions. Like Akhenaten, I like to think adopted some sort of like androgynous
Yeah.
um, art style, which I think was completely unusual for his time, which is why that period is so, like you said, so fascinating. But Hatshepsut did it as well. Maybe not to the same extent, but
Hmm.
definitely did it. Women in Greece and Rome did not adopt male dressing in real life or in art. Only in rare circumstances did they, and it was in relation to shame. So
Mm.
I think
Interesting.
it's in I think it's in well, it's in either one, Greece or Rome. But there is evidence for women wearing togas or male dressing when they have done something to cause shame,
Hmm.
which is very interesting, I
Yeah.
think. Very interesting. And I think women like Hatshepsut may have chosen to dress like a man or adopt styles of pharaonic dressing um, in a way to recognize tradition, perhaps, and reinforce her standing in the political landscape.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, but again, hard to know because, as I'm sure a lot of people know, there was an attempt to erase her from history,
Hmm.
and it's not positive. I'm not positive as to why it happened, but
It
yeah, there was an attempt.
really. It's so hard to kind of pin that down. And some might say that it is solely because she is a woman who ruled. But in the other case, like, you also have to just, like, the basic history of which this is always so complicated for me to explain, but her father was Tutmosis the. I always get this confused. I think he is Tutmosis the first. She is then married to Tutmosis the second, and Tutmosis II also has a secondary wife. She only has a daughter with Tutmosis II, and with his secondary wife, he has Tutmosis III, and then he dies, and Tutmosis III is a little baby, and she comes in as the co-regency. And then it's sort of almost like she does sort of a regency at the beginning, then it's a co-rulership, and then it's just her. And then the entire time, Tutmosis III is around there, hanging out, not really doing anything, just growing up. And when she eventually dies, he is kind of the main proponent for the destruction of her. And so you can look at it either that it is because she is a woman, or it's just because he's pissed off that she took his throne. Like,
Yeah, there was like no her like there was a little bit of like her easing to it, but like ultimately she was like, "This is the path I'm going to go down. Like you're
yeah,
just going to have to accept that."
exactly. And it's just like I hate to say it, anyone would probably be mad at that, where you're suddenly like, oh my god, I was taken advantage of when I was a baby and a young child, where like that was my right on the throne. So it like it does not, we cannot confirm or deny that it has anything to do with her gender. If his, like, let's say his younger brother did this to him, I'm sure we would get the exact same kind of result. And so it's hard to make that distinction, because that is something that is too nuanced for archaeology and history to do, unless somebody decides to write down their whole diary, which never usually happens. And
I'd like to think
yeah,
I'd like to think that it wasn't because she was a woman, I like to think that they didn't destroy it because they wanted to avoid encouraging women to step into that role. Because look at how many women came after her
yeah,
who, like, they weren't discouraged. They weren't like, oh, actually, this is not my space. They were like, here's an opportunity. Let me step into that. Let me do what I need to do to help Egypt, to help my husband, to give power and promote power. But again, we don't know.
yeah. It's hard to say. I think it's especially because of how I'm like, I wonder if like it could have, like, there's so many different reasons why it could have happened, but not necessarily that they are erasing her because she is a woman, but that they are erasing her because she is a woman pretending to be a man and a pharaoh. And I've done some videos on this and such, where you can see like the first, I think, yeah, both of these images that we have. This is her. She has 3 stages of kind of depicting herself, and both of these are that first stage, which typically dates to the closer to the co-regency. And then the middle stage is this half stage. She still has the very feminine face, the very tiny mouth, little pretty eyes, and the kind of more chiseled chin. But she's shirtless. Doesn't really have any boobs, but is shirtless. And then the last stage is she is a full man, minus there's just something about her eyes that you can always sort of tell, and she's got a beard. And it's that full like stage of I am changing how I am depicted to either legitimize myself or to just kind of make everybody feel comfortable, and maybe like I'm just going along with the norm. Like, that is what you see as a powerful pharaoh, so that is how I will depict myself. And again, art is not life. I always try to caution people from going the route that she is like actually transgender, because I'm like, please understand that these concepts that are in our modern world, we have absolutely no idea how they existed or how they were accepted in the ancient world. You can theorize, but don't say it that she is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just can't say that.
I think it's likely, honestly, that she probably just did it to acknowledge tradition. That's how a pharaoh presented themselves, at least in art. As you said before, we don't know if that's how they dressed in everyday life.
Oh God, yeah. They were probably in
I would
so
love
much more
to know if
comfy
they
clothing.
did. I can imagine that it's like super heavy, the head to, like, like
And
your poor neck.
even the pharaohs had their beards were fake. Their beards were not real. It was a piece of like probably wood or cartonnage or something that was. In certain statues, you can see the strap going along the chin that would be tied behind your back. Like, you think they're wearing that every single day? No, absolutely not.
They're getting up and they're like, oh, hold on, let me get ready.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I don't have my beard on.
I really do just like to think that it was like a nod to tradition, and that I don't. again, I don't think the Egyptian people had an issue with her ruling because it was quite peaceful. Her reign was
Mm-hmm.
quite peaceful. She really did a lot of really good things for Egypt during her reign.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they had an issue with it. I think it was maybe more just a way for her to be acknowledged how a pharaoh looks, at least in art.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Xavier, I'll have to check on that question. Xavier asks, is it true that Hatshepsut is the first one to refer to herself as a per-a or a per-a instead of a Nesut, which would Nesut would mean king. I am blanking on what per-a means in my head because I know per means house, and I know aa means great god or great something. I might have to look into that because I do not know. All I know is that my big like counterpoint for people like who say that she is transgender is that she uses female pronouns the whole time, in her name, in her titles, the whole time. Like that does not change. And she definitely. The other thing is that she is trying to legitimize herself because again, it's obviously not a thing that is done a lot in that time period. Ooh, my light is turning off for no reason. And you can look at her being depicted on her mortuary temple in depicting her mother. Like she kind of, it's so funny to me. Like this story is always one of my favorites to talk about because on her mortuary temple, in a way to legitimize herself, she claims that essentially the actual god Amun impregnated her mother and that she is not the daughter of the actual pharaoh who you would assume she would have to be related to legitimize her throne. But she skirts around it and says, no, Amun is my dad. Which is so funny to me because it's just not, it's not what I would expect. In my opinion, that makes me think that she is more illegitimate than legitimate for the throne because you're not related to her dad. But it's also one of my favorite images because it's one of the only images of a pregnant person like ever, even though she barely looks any different with this like tiny little belly. But she really wanted to be accepted, and it's hard to kind of say if she did that because she currently was not being accepted or if she was just being maybe looked at a little weird and she's just like, let's just throw all this extra stuff, let's change my look, let's put this on the mortuary temple, let's just try to add all this extra stuff so that the other thing is in the afterlife she would be legitimized. That's the other problem, is that maybe she thinks she's fine in the real world, but in the afterlife maybe someone's going to look down at her, so she's got to add all this extra stuff. But yeah, she's always very cool. People always ask me a lot about her, and I wish we knew more. We don't know that much.
I think it's like you said, it's understandable why people went to such an effort to destroy so much, but it's a huge shame. Like it really is just a huge shame. Because you want to know. I want to know. But yeah.
It's a shame because even I see in other instances, like when people talk about King's List and the people that are purposely removed, even when there is other conflicts in Egypt, people are not removed from the King's List as much as the three big people that are removed from, four big people are Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and I. Like those are like the four big people that are usually not included in these King's List. When there are plenty of other disputes and succession crises and things like that, that those people are still in there. And so it's very odd because it's just, there really are only those kind of four major people.
Yeah. Bear with me just a second. I'm just going to have to turn my camera off for a second.
Yeah, you're totally fine. Does anybody have any questions for Gwen or for me? I think Akhenaten and Hatshepsut are very, very similar. I think they are. They have their own, again, very much the like, do what you want, like take what you can. I think Hatshepsut and Cleopatra, I find, are probably more similar, especially because like they have that kind of female aspect of them, and that the potential that somebody might look down on somebody else. But yeah, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate how little sometimes we know about everything. Also, I forgot to thank you, Mr. Slothman, for subscribing for 6 months, and I forgot to say thank you, Random Artist in Seattle, for the follow on TikTok. And thank you guys for all the likes over on, nope, did I say that wrong? Thank you over on Twitch, and thank you for all the likes over on TikTok. We are chatting about ancient Egyptian women. We're going through some of the big famous ladies with our guest, Gwen, Flirting with History. If you're on TikTok, give her a follow. It's Flirting W History. She makes some really cool videos about the stuff that she's learning about. We're just taking a quick break. I'm going to see if I can chug some water. I don't have any corn nuts, which is sad, but I really want some corn nuts. What was I gonna say? You're back? Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, we were fine. We were just taking a water break. Absolutely.
My partner came home with the dog. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. We've had plenty of cats and dogs interrupt our streams, which I desperately need sometimes because I don't have a pet to interrupt my streams anymore.
If you hear whining, it's just the dog. He's just very
That's okay.
Okay, so this is, and please correct me with my pronunciation because I have to sound it out in my head, and then when I go to say it, I'm like, that's so wrong. But Sobeka Nyafaru?
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Amazing. That's the first time I've aced it out loud. She's the last of the women of focus today, and she is recognized as the first female pharaoh in history. And much like Hatshepsut, she adopted male dressing and depictions in art and took on the pharaonic titles. There's not a lot that we know about her because it seems like during her reign there was a period of instability, and there's a little bit of evidence to suggest that she sort of instilled a sense of fear. It's potential that maybe what we do know about her was erased because of that, or just at this time they just weren't documenting women the way that they did later on. She is the first female pharaoh, like I said, for whom we have evidence that there may have been some sort of upheaval about her ruling, but much like Cleopatra, she seems to potentially have had a hand in the death of family members. Can't say definitively, but it's interesting to think about that it's not uncommon to see these people go after power.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how for so long, how ancient world and even getting closer to some of the modern world, that is just how the powers ruled. This is a very different time period. No such things as democracy or anything like that. It is you eat or get eaten in this time period. So you're going to do what you need to do. She has always been a very interesting figure, and it's just we know so little. And we know little about all of these kind of early eras. But in comparison to some of the other women like Mary Neith, from the pre-dynastic or early dynastic period, who may have done a co-regency or ruled or anything, we don't have an image of her. we have her name written like once. There we actually have her tomb at least. Sobek Nefru, if I remember correctly, these pictures are also not 100% sure if they're her, which is also difficult.
Yeah, it's so, and I think like circumstance plays a huge part, especially with the women that we've like spoken about in ruling or co-ruling. Circumstance plays a huge role in what we have of them, I guess, how much information we have. Given that she came in at a time where there was a lot of instability, she was the last of her dynasty, the last of the Golden Age.
Yeah.
Egypt. People may just not have taken well to her reign. They may not have taken well to the fact that she was a woman who reigned.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say.
That's what I was comparing, because I'm very bad with dates, and so I was like, when is 1763? So I have my very short version of the timeline of history, and so I'm like, oh, okay, I see that the Hyksos is like right after her, like around 1750 BCE. So this is the very, very end of the Middle Kingdom, and I wish I knew more about the Middle Kingdom. I know a good amount, but it is like shocking how much I really only care about the New Kingdom in comparison. Xavier, very good thing you pointed out. So the second picture we have here with this robe, this is a very, very specific robe. And it's very interesting that like this is a possibility that this could be Sobek Nefru, because more than likely that robe is called a Hebsed robe. And a Hebsed robe is a white, very tight-fitting robe that sometimes had this very sharp angle at the top. You can see her kind of like gripping her. And it was typically worn during a Hebsed ceremony, which was usually, not always, but it was supposed to be in celebration of 30 years on the throne. And it was meant to be a thing that in the very, very early Old Kingdom, the king, which would it actually be him or somebody taking his place, who knows, the king was supposed to do a race. He was supposed to run. And we have like depictions of like the really, really early Pharaoh Djoser doing this run. Essentially just proving that they're healthy enough to keep on ruling. Which I just always find so hysterical that is the test, is just to run like a big circle. And so we have depictions of a lot of these early pharaohs in these Hebsed robes. And so the thing about it is that she definitely did not rule for 30 years. But I will say, honestly, like, it kind of makes sense because this is the end of the Middle Kingdom. By the New Kingdom, a lot of pharaohs were fudging the numbers. And I think Akhenaten celebrated his Hebsed after, like, 5 years or something. Like, I think we have a lot of evidence of pharaohs in the New Kingdom celebrating it multiple times and celebrating it not when they reached 30 years. Which is fine. They can do what they want. But in, like, the Old Kingdom, it was 30 years. Nothing else. And Xavier, what would happen if they weren't healthy? Of course they don't talk about that. Of course, like, they're all healthy. Of course. Why would we talk? Like, it's kind of the funny thing is that, like, again, the Egyptians don't talk about the negative options. Like, they don't talk about, like, people sometimes say, oh, like, was there an equivalent of, like, hell in ancient Egyptian afterlife? And I'm like, well, like, your heart, like the closest we sort of have is your heart would get eaten by Amen. And they're like, well, what happened to you? And I'm like, oh, no, they don't talk about that. Like, you're just gone. Like
They don't want you to know.
They don't want you to know. And it's such a funny thing because it's like, it's either that they, like, don't want you to know and they don't want you to think about it, or they were all pretty freaking confident that they were going to get into the afterlife. And so it's like, why talk about something that's not an option? Like, I give you that first level of fear that maybe Amit will eat your heart, or your heart will be thrown into a lake of fire, but like that's it. Like it's no torturous place like all like tons of other depictions of the afterlife and the bad afterlife and stuff. It's just like it's the same thing with the board game Senate, which is another favorite topic of mine, where it was just a normal board game at first, and then it took on this like religious aspect that you would play against fate to see if you can get into the afterlife. And people have asked me, well, what happens if you lose? I'm like, that's the thing, you don't. It's just you don't. You just always they don't talk about what happens if you lose because you're not gonna lose.
Why not? No.
Yeah, like you're fine. Like don't worry about it. Which is it's such a funny like anxiety ridden thing to think about, but don't worry about it.
It's
fine.
actually like how much it meant to them, and like how much they talk about it like constantly.
Oh my god.
You'd think that like. Yeah, you'd think that they would like, give some insight into actually like the options.
Yeah.
Other than like you have to get in.
Which, and a lot of times it makes it seem like that the religion didn't actually mean a lot to them. Which I've read this one paper and I haven't finished reading it all the way, but I remember summarizing it a long, long time ago that it's not a very popular theory. It's kind of only been proposed by like one or two people, that the general Egyptian public was way more secular than we assume. And that the pharaohs and the high elites and the priesthood had to keep up appearances and do that. But that the normal public would take any benefits from it. Hey, it's a festival weekend, we get a day off, or we're gonna get an extra amount of rations or food, or we're gonna get some specialty foods that are not like really available. But it didn't really all consume their lives that people think it did. And then the same thing sort of goes with the afterlife, and hand in hand is that like they weren't obsessed with death, but everything, the vast majority of artifacts you guys are seeing in museums and in sites are all for the middle upper class only. Even upper middle class to upper class. You're not seeing stuff from the lowly of the low. They probably couldn't even give a shit. They just wanted work and to be able to survive. Like they're like, hey, if it helps, I'll give a loaf of bread to the fertility god so that my crops grow. But that's it. They can't afford much really else. So why is it going to be super important for them? Which is the same reason why a lot of people always ask me why were the main looters of tombs ancient Egyptians. It's like, hey, obviously somebody doesn't care about the protection of the pharaoh in the afterlife, and that they are going to do what they want to do to be able to survive and to be able to take and steal. Like, they're not cared about a curse. They don't care. They're going to do it anyway because they need sustenance. They need something to sell to be able to live. Like, or be rich, whichever one. But it's the very different mindset than I think people really think it is.
But yeah, that's basically the end, I think. I put a little few more points there, but they're sort of just reiterating the points that I made at the start. I think collectively we can all agree that these women did incredible things for Egypt and for the future of each woman after them, including the ones that I haven't focused on, the ones I haven't touched on, the ones that I didn't pop in the timeline. I think the more we go through each person, the more you can see how the woman after them benefited from what the one did before, if that makes sense. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much, Gwen. Does anyone have any last questions? I'm going to go back to the just chatting screen and go back to this screen, but then move this and then, oh my god, nope, that's not what I want. This and stop sharing. There we go. But does anyone have any other questions for Gwen or for myself about, honestly, anything Egypt, but women in Egypt? I know we didn't cover everybody, but there's so many to cover, and I know some get way too much attention, some get so little attention, and the thing that sucks is that the ones that usually get little attention, we don't have enough information to give them as much attention as we can for other ones. Like, the reason Cleopatra and Hatshepsut and Nefertiti are talked about the most is because we have a lot of information in comparison. But if we're also talking about other like royal women or empresses in Rome, they probably have more information there too. It's like it's always, everything is different. Every ancient culture is going to record things differently, and so I know Cleopatra is probably your favorite, but do you have another, like, your second favorite? And this can be anyone we talked about or anyone we didn't talk about, because it's very hard. There's always hard to have favorites, but
I think the first Cleopatra that married into the Ptolemaic family, she's probably one of my favorites. But aside from her, I think Nefertiti, definitely. I think yeah. Do you have any favorites?
I think it's very hard because even though I like the Amarna period a lot, I actually think I like TA better than Nefertiti. And for a variety of reasons, because I will say, like, I mentioned it before, I'm like, I want to be the cool Egyptologist who likes the pharaohs that are not very popular. So if people ask me, like, who my favorite pharaohs, I will usually say actually Amenhotep III, rather than Akhenaten himself, even though he's kind of the real answer. But I really like TA, and then I was talking about Ahahotep I or Ahahotep II, or whichever one I've always admired. And then I'll just pull one from the Old Kingdom. I always really liked, oh my god, I'm blanking on her name, Marisa Ankh III, wife of, making sure I remember, wife of Khafre? I can't remember. Her tomb is one of the only accessible mastabas in the Giza Plateau. It's beautiful. It has some really weird art in comparison, because she has this very short haircut. She wears this very short little bob the entire time, and that tomb is very interesting because it has imagery of her and her mother in it, and it has like kind of one image of her husband, which is kind of funny. And there's a lot of really beautiful, in one of the rooms, the entire thing is lined with images of women, or carvings, rock carvings of all these women, and none of them are labeled, which is even more annoying. But like the potential that it is like her mother and her aunts and her daughters and her the potential is there, and so Marisa Ankh has always been very, very interesting to me. And I'm trying to think of like some non-royal women that I like. There is a person, somebody just commented this on a video. There's a woman named Nessie Khonshu, who I think she's third intermediate period, which is also a super weird time period in comparison. And she, I think, was married to I always forget how to say this guy's name, Pinegem II, which is this really weird time period. And somebody commented, because there is a coffin at the Cleveland Museum of Art that is for a Nessie Khonshu, and she was like, oh, you said in a video, you said that name, Nessie Khonshu, and I was wondering if it's the same person. And I did this deep dive, and I totally got confused, because yes, the coffin is for a woman named Nessie Khonsu from the 21st dynasty, same exact time period. And the Wikipedia for this woman has a picture of that coffin from the Cleveland Museum. Not the same person, completely different person. Probably related in some way, but the mummy and coffin of the actual Nessie Khonsu is still in Egypt. And we also have, the reason this girl had remembered it in a video was that there are these tiny little blue faience cups. And there's like, God, I think there's like about 20 of them have been discovered. And they were most likely looted out of some sort of tomb and put on the art market and something, because they appear all over the world. And they are literally like in every a ton of huge museums have is at least one of these tiny little cups that has the name of Nessie Khonsu, and some sort of little spell. And so that I always, when I realized that there were so many of these cups, I was like, why are there so many of these cups? Where do they all come from? This is like, matching sets are not a thing really in ancient Egypt. So that's why it was so like, huh, so interesting. Xavier, I like your hot take. Third intermediate women had more power because central royal power was decentralized. Yeah. There's always that chance that they have a little bit more kind of wiggle room when the pharaoh's not as powerful. But yeah, there's so many interesting women. For a long time when I started MelissainDeNile, it was a blog and a Instagram, and I had all of my Wednesday blogs were called Women Crush Wednesdays, and they were either about an ancient Egyptian woman, an ancient Egyptian goddess, or a female Egyptologist. And so I was able to cover a lot of very interesting ancient Egyptian women over the last over the year or so that I was doing those blogs before I transitioned into videos and such. But it's still something that I think needs to be researched more, though, in general. And it's hard because obviously the vast majority of texts are really not going to be from the perspective of a woman. And to be honest, I don't even know any. I was trying to think of any like literature stories, any like fictional stories, and I can't picture any in my head that have a female protagonist, minus at the beginning of the Tale of the Doomed Prince, there are 3 women who are like sort of oracles. Oracle's not totally the right word to use, but priestesses who predict the future and predict that he is doomed. And actually, now
actually,
that
I think I've heard of that one.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, nothing. I think that rings a bell for me.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can't think of. Yeah.
It's one of my favorite stories, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it is probably the only story that has a good image of a woman, or like has like so I forgot because of those ladies, but then the second half of the for those who don't know the story of the doomed prince, this prince, he is doomed that he is going to either die by a dog, a crocodile, or a hippo. No, dog, crocodile. Yeah, hippo. Or no, snake. And he is like kind of isolated, like his father isolates him from the world, and then when he's sitting atop the palace, he sees a guy with a dog, and he goes, "What is that?" And his servant goes, "It's a dog," and he goes, "I want one." And then his dad goes, "Yeah, sure, I'll give you a dog," which is like the stupidest way to start a story. And he then leaves and like kind of decides to go out and live his life, and he encounters a woman in a tower who is a princess, and if all these men are jumping along the tower, and if you could jump to the window, then you could marry her. And she didn't know he was a prince, but he did this. He jumped and he marries her. And the woman is so like good in this, because essentially like they do get married, they're all cool, and then he eventually tells her, "Here is my fate. This is the prediction of my life." And she literally looks at him and she goes, dude, you have to kill your dog. And he goes, no, like, this is my best friend. Like, I can't do that to him. And then she ends up saving him from the snake when he's sleeping. A snake comes and tries to get him, and she saves him. And the unfortunate thing is that the story is not complete, and so we do not know like what happens at the very, very end, except that a crocodile and a dog, his dog, start trying to attack him. But it is probably, in my mind, one of the only like female characters. And actually Xavier just reminded me of another one, but that story I don't know as well. It's Red I always hate this girl's name. Reggie Edet, who is the mother that's in oh god, what story is that? That's the one that predicts, it's a later story from the New Kingdom that predicts the three pharaohs who built the pyramids. That she has triplets, and so she is in the story. I think that's what that is. I'm trying to remember, but I'm pretty sure that's what that story is about. But I think it's just those two, and in the Doomed Prince, the princess has no name, I don't think. So that's always sucks. Thordal, no, it is not a grim storytelling. That is me summarizing the actual ancient Egyptian story, because I've read it in actual ancient Egyptian. But yeah, we need to study women more. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's a huge shame that like when all of the literature started coming out about ancient history, it was such a male-dominated field.
Yeah.
And I still feel like for the most part, it sort of is.
Yeah.
But then also I just think the history does not get the credit it deserves. Mm-hmm. Especially like, educational institutions like university. It's just like the arts are very forgotten about, but they play a huge role in culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hopefully the more people that kind of dive into history and the arts, the more we can sort of go back and rewrite the history that probably wasn't written well. But yeah.
Yeah, because I find one of the hard things I find is that in some of the more modern literature about some of these women, it is a little bit too speculative. I don't know if I will admit I have not read this book, but in grad school we had to do a book review on a book, and my coworker read this book, or my cohort read this book, and it is, I don't remember which Karakuni book it is, but it is, I'm trying to think, because I have one of them. I can't remember which one I have. I think I might have the woman, what is it? The woman who becomes king? Oh yeah, the woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, the woman who would be king, which I think that's Hatshepsut, right? Yes.
Yeah.
I don't remember if this is the book my friend read, or if Karakuni wrote a more recent one that is about another, maybe Nefertiti. I have to remember, but whichever book my friend read, she was like, there's a lot of...
Is it the when women ruled the world? That's got Nefertiti on the cover.
It might be that one. Yeah, it's either one of those. I will just say that it's either one of those. I think the more I think about it, it might be this one, but it very much is, it's one of these Karakuni books. And like, Karakuni is she's a great Egyptologist. She's done a lot of really great work in cataloging types of coffins and stuff like that. The thing that essentially my friend concluded with one of these books was that because it was more focused on the general public, like the audience was more the general public, that it was a little bit too speculative. It was a little bit too like psychoanalyzing. And looking at this book right now, there's no citations, which is saying something, because like like, she has a ton of different sources for the reading in the back, and there are a couple. I'm actually surprised with how little there are footnotes in the back, but there aren't a lot. And with something like this, you should have a lot. And actually, looking at what this is, these footnotes, not a lot of them are citations. A lot of them are more like further like footnote stuff. Yeah, like 17. This is a debate over whether KV-38 was Tutmosis I's original tomb or whether it had been made for him and his grandson. Like, it's not a citation, that's just like a further reading kind of thing. And so it, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the recent stuff is a lot for popular media, which is very different than full research, which is unfortunate because I want people to be interested, and I want academic writing to become more accessible, but there is still a difference between the two of them. There needs to be that difference between the two of them.
I think just like how little women's history has been studied, and I guess the perception people had of it when literature started coming out, it makes it very hard, I think, for people to want to sit down and digest that sort of thing. It makes it very hard for people to, I guess, separate, modern perspectives and like 20th century really negative perspectives. People, I think it's just the work. People don't want to do the work. People want to throw out an assumption. They want people to believe that. They want people to like affirm that. But it's so hard when women's history is just not spoken about. It's not written about. It's not out there in the same way that men's history is.
Yeah, and it's very much like non-academics, like the general public, they just want to consume something kind of quickly. Like, it is just the kind of the unfortunate part of our age that, like, there are academics who are doing stuff like this. Like, to be honest, like, this is like this huge historiography of Cleopatra, and it does have like a good amount of citations. It's got lots of images in there and stuff like that. Like, this is a chunky book. It's a chunky book. This one is much more readable and consumable, and so if people are going to read anything, they're probably going to read like that. And it's very, very hard to kind of, like, I will say, like, the quote on the back here is actually, ironically, from Michelle Moran, the fictional author. And it says, "What Stacey Schiff did for Cleopatra, Carrie Cooney has done for Hatshepsut, completely unput-downable," which I don't even think is a word. In some aspects, that is a very great, like, person to put on the back of this. Academically, that's a historical fictional author. She probably could have got, like, Carrie Cooney knows a lot of very important Egyptologists. And because there's nobody like that on the back of this book, tells you something, like, to be honest. Like, she really knows a lot. And I was gonna say the Cleopatra book, which I also have, the Stacey Schiff Cleopatra book. This is the book that you see people reading, and not this one. Very, very different. I don't know what Stacey Schiff's background is, but I don't really think it is Egyptology.
I don't think so, but I do see her work being circulated around quite a lot. Like, people saying, like, "Oh, you should read Stacey, Cleopatra." She, if you look up books about Cleopatra, her name is right up there.
Yeah.
Which I don't have any books of hers. I haven't read any of her stuff.
I have not read this one either. But it's literally, essentially, she is a Pulitzer Prize winning biographer that is her background. And all of her other books that are listed back here are like the author of Vera, Miss Vladimir Nabokov, which I don't even know who that is. And then it's A Great Improvisation, Franklin, France, and the Birth of America. And like, she's received fellowships from the Guggenheim, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Center of Scholars and Writers of the New York Public Library. She's got an Academy Award in Literature. But really, like, there's not that much, like, to say that she has done. That she's probably a very, very good researcher.
Mm-hmm.
And a good writer. Like, she's contributed to New Yorker, New York Times, and Washington Post. Like, she's a good writer and potentially a good researcher. This one does have a lot of notes, though, I will say, which are mostly quotes and, oh, actually, that's so interesting. So many of these are quotes from, like, the early, like, scholars, like, Strabo and Eusebius, Hesiod. Like, a lot of these are kind of direct quotes from that, which already that's not, depending on what she's talking about, obviously, but not the best. This book is sort of supposed to be a biography of Cleopatra. I don't know, are there chapter titles? The Egyptian Woman, Chapter 2, Dead Man Don't Bite, Chapter 3, Cleopatra Captures the Old Man by Magic, Chapter 4, Golden Age Never Was the Present Age, Chapter 5, Man is by Nature a Political Creature, and the last chapter, We Must Often Shift the Sails When We Wish to Arrive in Port. Oh no, there's more. The Object of Gossip for the Whole World, which makes sense. Illicit Affairs and Bastard Children, which I think is my favorite one, and The Wickedest Woman in History. So it does seem to kind of talk about it, but like, this is like this historiography. It's not, it I believe goes through, let's see. Part 1 is Fantasy and Fact, the story according to Octavius, and Cleopatra's version. Those are the three. And then in part 2, she digests all the different roles of her. So the suicide, the lover, the woman, the queen, the foreigner, the killer, the child, and Cleopatra Winks is like how that is dissected kind of through this. Also, a recommendation, Cleopatra by Dwayne Roll is also good. I don't think I have that one. I was gonna say this is my my Tutankhamun shelf and my Cleopatra and Amarna period shelf. And so I also have this one of Nefertiti. Again, Melissa hasn't read any of these books, but but this one I think is also a biography. This says Unlocking the Mystery Surrounding Egypt's Most Famous and Beautiful Queen. So, wonder how good. Melissa needs to start reading some of these books. But yeah. Hello, Not the Brain. We are just about to wrap up. Is there any other questions for Gwen about ancient Egyptian women, some of the women that we talked about today? Otherwise, I will let her go because it is morning for her. Well, it is very
it's
late.
Afternoon now.
Oh, it's almost afternoon now. I was gonna say.
Almost afternoon.
Yeah, it's afternoon. We were talking about this before we got started, but I think Gwen wins for furthest person that has guest starred. We're on a 14-hour time difference, which I think is the most we've ever had for sure. But yeah, everyone, the lecture will go up on my YouTube. I've actually been coming quite quick at editing, so hopefully it will be up in the next week or so. And then don't forget to follow Flirting with History. You said TikTok, Instagram, and Substack are your three?
I'm not super active on TikTok anymore. Um, Instagram and Substack, I'm kind of in and out.
Yeah,
But yeah.
absolutely. So I think we will let Gwen go enjoy her afternoon. I think we will stick around and do some daily games though before I have to go to bed because I don't have to go to work tomorrow, so I can stay up a little bit later than I normally want to do. Prepping for kids' archaeology camp and such. But thank you, Gwen, so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we would love to have you back another time if you have another topic, maybe next year, that you'd like to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me nap away.
Absolutely.